And so I thought, I need to do something now that's going to bring that spark, ignite that passion back in me. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? Sitting behind a spreadsheet, calculating billing for 3 days is not where I get my satisfaction. In seeing these individuals develop month on month on month, going from being, relatively unconfident, walking into the training environment thinking, geez, what do I expect? To having that trusted environment where we're open, it's collaborative, it's accountable, it's got purpose. You see them flourish month on month on month. And I love that. I think there's going to be a bit of an explosion of situations where these agencies operating with these umbrella models are going to be outed. There's a reason why the government have done this. If you have a large agency temporary workforce on site, talk to them, include them, involve them in your morning huddles or your morning meetings. Get to know them to some extent. It's not a them and us, because a bit like from a supplier perspective, you incorporate your agency workforce, you'll get a lot more from them. They'll be much more loyal. They'll do the extra flex overtime that's needed because they're part of the team. They don't just feel like the agencies that shoved in the corner to pack those boxes.
Hi, it's Chris. On today's episode of Talent Unboxed, I'm joined by Amy, who runs 2 separate businesses. One is a consultancy where she goes in and audits supply chains, which is great for any business that is supplying into big, large corporates and wants to know how they can get the most out of their suppliers, as well as a second business is about coaching and developing people. So if you want to know how you can get the best out of your teams and your supply chain, then this is the one you want to watch. I'd love to welcome Amy to Talent Unboxed today, who's going to talk to us about a variety of things that she's doing right now. Amy, do you want to kind of just introduce yourself and tell us what it is you got going on?
So there are 2 elements to the work that I do. Primarily, it's leadership training, which encompasses DISC, personality profiling, and leadership training is a wide array of things. So it's emerging talent management, leadership, sales, which is kind of my passion. And then the other element of my business is supply chain auditing, but with a lens through the agency labour perspective, because my background for the last 27 years, I think, has been recruitment and agency labour. So I kind of focus in on that side of things. Okay.
So tell us, let's go back to when you first got into recruitment. What were you doing pre-recruitment? Because I think this is...
So I worked in electrical wholesalers, and it was a totally male-dominated environment. So that was a great grounding for me to get into the ruthless, cutthroat life of recruitment. And I saw an advert in the paper back in the day for sales, and I didn't actually realise it was recruitment until I rocked up at the recruitment agency, and they put me through a gruelling 3-stage interview process. I had to drive to Sheffield for my final interview and do a presentation. Sheffield,
right.
Yeah, it was pro-temp.
Oh, right,
back in the day.
Yeah.
Met the lovely Lorraine, and that's when my life started in recruitment, and I loved it.
So you're Leicester-based, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you were kind of into your recruitment time?
In
the Leicester market?
It was Leicester City Centre, and I was brought in to open the commercial division because ProTemp was a logistics recruitment agency. So I came on board with a lady called Deepa, and we set up the commercial division of ProTemp.
Okay. What did you... Obviously, nobody expects, or I haven't met anyone yet that has aspirations to get into recruitment. It's kind of one of those industries that you fall into and then you never really leave.
Yeah.
But I think it's like once it's got you, it's got you. Was that the same thing for you?
Totally. For me, the hardest part was the variables. You know, when you work with product, you know, an electrical wholesaler's a plug socket's a plug socket, a consumer unit's a consumer unit. It's tangible, you can see it, it's got a fixed price to it. And so when you work in recruitment, the biggest challenge is the variables in charge rates, pay rates, type of worker, you know, it just, no two days were ever the same, yeah. And so I love that. I love the variety of the job. I love the fact that you were 360, so you did everything from, you know, bringing the sale on to nurturing that business to working with the temporary workers who, you know, I'd got utmost respect for. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I definitely fell into recruitment, but soon realised I'd found my tribe in recruitment.
Yeah. And then where did your career take you? Because obviously I worked for you indirectly as you were my regional manager, I think, for a period of time at Life Staff many years ago. We're going back to 2006, so it's 20 years ago now.
I know.
Did you know quite quickly on within recruitment that you wanted to kind of climb the ladder, or was it?
Yeah, I'd always been super like determined, ambitious. Yeah, more so than I am now. I'm kind of tapped my foot off the pedal a little bit now, but so yeah, when I worked in the wholesalers, I was the youngest in the company, and it was a nationwide company, sales rep in the country, and the only female sales rep in the company. So that kind of gave me great grounding to think, do you know what? If I want to do something, I'll do it. So when I came into recruitment, I know I needed to find my feet, but I also knew that I wanted to go into management. So I think my first management role was 2002, 2003. And then the acquisition came about with Right for Staff, didn't it? I think around 2004 maybe. And then I sort of got promoted into it's the roles fell. So I never went knocking to say I want promotion. They sort of just fell, you know, the right timing, I suppose. And then I moved into a regional role, and then moved into the general manager role. But the business changed, and I realised that it was probably my time to.
I think the sector in itself changed as well, didn't it, in recruitment over quite a quick period of time, but very aggressively back in the early 2000s into like 2010 and beyond.
You just couldn't catch your breath, could you? Because every year, new piece of legislation, new regulations. And
not only that, I think you found that there was a lot more competition that was sprouting up around you. So therefore, you went through periods where the margins were then getting driven lower and lower, or clients' expectations were becoming higher and higher.
It was really interesting, I found, because I worked nationally, well, southern, so my territory, if you like, was Colville, right down to Portsmouth, Hampshire, Southampton, Basingstoke, you know, all of that area. So you would have pockets of really loyal customers that, you know, you would be totally consultative with, and margin and pricing came secondary to relationships and service levels. And then you'd got the real transient market like Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes was so transient, where it was all every couple of years there was a tender coming in, and you had to be really super competitive with your pricing. So it was so regionalised, our business and how the local businesses operated. That was one of the interesting things I found in recruitment is those variables as well.
So then you got the senior role, and then obviously there was a change of direction then for you. What made you kind of go into that consultancy space, or was there stuff in between?
Well,
what happened then?
I always knew I wanted to work for myself. I always knew I wanted to have my own business, but the timing was never right. You know, when you're a general manager, you're working sort of 60-hour weeks, and you don't even think about anything other than it being invested in that business. And then COVID hit, and I just thought, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And I'd already been massively involved in developing the training programs, the academy programs within GI Group, which was an acquisition from Right for Staff. So I already knew that I really enjoyed the training space, the learning, seeing people develop. And so I knew I wanted to progress that rather than staying fully operational. But the beauty of the training that I deliver is because I've worked operational in that space for 24 odd years, I look at it through an operational lens. I don't look at it through a training lens. So then I just thought, I'm going to just bite the bullet and do it. So I set up Black Dogs consultancy on the back of my 2 black dogs.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what, let's give it a go.
So how did you go about? Because I think people listening are, in the same position perhaps, that want to think about going from an employment safe, well regarded role within a corporate organisation to then taking that big leap. I know COVID happened, which probably then helped a little bit, like you said, but what was the trigger that made you think, right?
For me, nothing really excited me anymore. And I know that sounds like a really depressing thing to say, but I really wanted to get my spark back. I knew towards the latter years, maybe 18 months of working in recruitment, I'd kind of lost my spark a bit. And that wasn't fair on the people I was working with, because I owed it to them to bring everything. I always brought everything. And so I felt the pressure of that. And so I thought, I need to do something now that's going to bring that spark, ignite that passion back in me. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work out. I go back to employed status. So you've got to
you
just
could have
back
just found
yourself.
a job, right? With your background, you would have been able to have found a job quite easily, I would have thought, if it didn't work out.
I would have thought so. But I just had courage in my own convictions. I just thought, I'm going to back myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I never once let that little, voice on my shoulder say, "Oh, are you good enough?" In fact, I did. And then I had to kind of give it a good boot off.
Yeah.
It must have been similar for you when you set ACS up.
It was kind of different in a way because I started off as an employee. So I didn't have to have I didn't have to cover the weight of the finance and, all of that stuff. Although I've always been very active in that space and, I guess what I'm trying to say is my wages weren't determined by the income. We were quite fortunate though, because we'd worked in the area that we had good reputation. Mm-hmm. So, and we had customers that came quite quickly to us where we were generating money. Did you find that was the same for you? Or?
Yeah, well, what happened for me is I kind of put the feelers out to my network of people I'd worked with before and been associated with before and said, look, I'm thinking of doing this. And I hadn't got a real core offering as such. I just knew that I was going to do something in the agency labour market space, but not operationally sourcing and recruiting. And one of my very good friends said, actually, Sainsbury's are looking for somebody in their agency labour team as like a subject matter expert because they've just restructured and they don't have anybody that is sort of your experience in agency labour. So would you be able, would you be interested? And I was like, absolutely, let's do it. Yeah. So I worked with them. I can't remember whether it was full-time or part-time, but on a contracted basis through my business. I think it was part-time. And between me and Sue Catley, I don't know whether you remember Sue Catley, who was the agency labour manager at the time and still works for Sainsbury's. I'd worked with Sue before already. And then we sort of started to sort out the recruitment side of things within Sainsbury's, standardising systems, processes.
Yeah, because let's just touch on that briefly, right? So for again, those that are listening, how big is Sainsbury's temp labour usage? Are we talking, because obviously from people, when they think of Sainsbury's, will just be thinking, I go into the shops and I buy my bacon and eggs and bread and milk, and then I come out again and I don't think about anything that goes on in before or after it, right?
Yeah. Then that happens. That's kind of typical within retail, isn't it?
Yeah,
you only see what you touch.
Yeah.
Sainsbury's. The agency labour side of things was much bigger a few years back. They outsourced a lot of their depots now to 3PL, so the 3PLs manage a bulk of the depots. But collectively, if you think about the logistics side of things, so the transport side of things, it's huge. When you think about the warehouse and the internal structure, there's an abundance of workers there. And then you think about
so these are the warehouses that are supplying the supermarkets with the daily produce that then people are buying, right? So then those staff that work within that, the drivers that then transport the goods to the supermarkets.
Yep. So you've got the logistics, you've got the drivers that are transporting the goods to the supermarkets, and then you've got the workers that are picking, packing, and sorting all the loads.
Yeah.
And the pressure that is on the logistics side of things. If you think within London, the amount of roadworks, the amount of delays on the road, that 10-minute, 15-minute delay from depot to store can have massive repercussions, because then it's the knock-on effect of the rest of the logistics function. But then also, when you think Sainsbury's, you don't necessarily think Argos. And Argos plays a big part of the Sainsbury's function. And that's what for me now, my role within Sainsbury's has evolved to becoming more overseeing peak labour recruitment per se. So for Argos, I'll oversee the agency side of things. I'll be involved with Argos in looking at what the peak numbers look like and what the strategy looks like in terms of temp split, perm split, fixed term contractors, couriers, what the repercussions, what the cost implications. So it's a lot of strategic work within Sainsbury's Argos that I do now, leading into peak. And actually, the first meeting is happening tomorrow for peak.
Okay. So we're only now, what's the date today? It's the 26th of May. We're already talking about Christmas, right? In the retail space. And for some, would you think that's quite early, or is that for some that, I think some of the businesses we talk to, they're planning Christmas in February, right?
I know.
And when it comes to thinking about, they're getting stock from overseas and stuff that's made in China and other parts of Asia that have got to come over. Now you've got the Strait of Hormuz that's battling some of that, in terms of getting
the fuel
stock,
prices,
fuel. So, Sainsbury's as a whole, in terms of their logistics and supply chain function, in the ramp up to peak, will use what kind of numbers of temp staff?
Oh,
just roughly. You don't have to, I'm not holding you to
talking across the 3PLs as well. Well, there's 22 depots. Let's say on average they use 400 to 500
each.
At peak, 300 to 500 at peak
per site.
Yeah.
So we're talking a lot. Just to give everyone a context of the scale of it. That's a lot of people that they have to think about planning.
Yeah.
Think about onboarding.
Then you've got the primary sites. They have usage, and then you've got the Argos local fulfillment centres, which is the division now that I kind of oversee for peak. There's 17, 18 of those.
Wow. So it's a beast.
It is a beast. Yeah.
And how are Sainsbury's? I don't know how much you're able to talk about this, but how are Sainsbury's finding the labour market in general?
Well, their business has changed. Their peaks have changed, so that then don't have such a spike anymore. It's much more of a smoother transition into peak. I can only speak for the depots that Sainsbury's still manage directly. And yes, there's challenges, but the suppliers, the relationship, and I think that's the most important thing. coming from an agency labour background, is the relationship you have with your suppliers. They are partners. They're not just a supplier. It's not a transactional relationship. You've got to be consultative. They know their market, and so you've got to listen. If they're telling you that this particular region's really struggling with X, Y, and Z supply, then you've got to listen. You'd be foolish not to. So I think because of the strength of the relationships and the open, honest relationships that Sainsbury's has with their suppliers, it means that you don't hit that blip necessarily because you're already aware of it.
And do you think before having someone in the seat that came from an operational agency life that they felt like that? Or is that something you brought into the Sainsbury's mindset?
I think Sue's most definitely created that culture for sure.
Right.
I think it's all dependent. You'll know working with businesses that it's all about the individual. So you might have one depot that will have a really strong relationship with their agency and they see them as absolute partners. And you'll have one depot that just sees them as a supplier and will be beating you over the head if 2 temps don't arrive, on a Monday morning.
Yeah.
So it really depends depot by depot, but in terms of centrally as a function, and it's called the resourcing team now, not agency labour, there is definitely a culture of partnership.
Which is nice, right? Because you're right, we have an experience of working with both. And I'd be keen to understand from your perspective, because I know what my view on this is, because those businesses that see you as a supplier and do haul you over the coals when, the odd little thing happens are the ones that don't necessarily win in the fight for peak delivery. Those that really value partnership, value the, working together, working collaboratively around finding a solution, not just thinking we're making up excuses if we're saying the market's challenging for X, Y, and Z reason, like you say. Those that do that are the ones that really
100%
smash the peak.
So for the last 2 years, I've been working with Argos very closely with the head of fulfillment in ensuring a successful peak period. And one of the things that I introduced was weekly calls with the agencies, weekly calls with the recruitment champions on site. And so we never go more than 7 days without understanding the challenges, quickly being proactive and reactive to changes in the market, changes to situations and challenges that are happening depot by depot. And it's listening to the agencies. It's listening to you're almost like a conduit, when it comes to listening to the sites and understanding their challenges, listening to the agencies, reading between the lines, and then between us coming up with a solution, because there's no point in the depots keep saying they're not providing the heads, they just can't provide the heads. And there's no point in the agencies just keep saying it's a challenging market, it's a challenge. That's just not solving any problems whatsoever. It becomes a blame game then. So you have to look at things from a different lens and say, okay, what are we going to do about it? What's within your control and what's within your control?
And has there ever been any situation where you haven't been able to find a solution and this is just a case of let's just do as best we can? I
think you reach a point with peak that it's too late. If you're still trying to recruit 50, 60 warehouse heads at the end of November,
Black Friday,
then you know that the quality of those individuals are probably not going to be of the best calibre. You've got to accept that. The sites have to accept that. And the agencies have to just do the very best that they can to provide the quality that they can.
So, message to any SME out there, right? Because our target audience for the podcast is small and medium businesses. So learning from your experience within corporate as well as in, bigger retail organisations such as Sainsbury's, what are those 3 key things? Obviously, partnership's a big one. So respect your agency. Work with them.
100%. Yeah.
What is there anything else that you would think would be a good
plan early?
Yeah.
You've got to plan early. If you don't plan early, then the year just skips you by. And the third one would be respect for the workers. I mean, it's not easy. These guys, the chances are they're not earning an awful lot. depending on what role they're in. And they've got families, they've got lives, they're individuals, they're humans. And that's one of the big things I look from a training lens as well when I'm working with recruiters. It's so it's so obvious that the client is the end user, but the client is also the candidate. It's not that temp in the corner that's wearing the high vis that, without a name. That temp's probably got 2 kids and a dog and, a mortgage to pay for. So it's just having mutual respect, really, I would say.
Okay. All valid points. The auditing side. So obviously I'm not going to ask you to name and shame anyone because that would just be stupid. But there's got to have been some horror stories that you've come up with when you're auditing, right, in these supply chains that you thinking, we need to strip this supplier out of that situation, or is there anything? Again, you don't need to say anything in particular, but I guess it's not many of these businesses, certainly in our space as well, necessarily understand the importance of that compliance thing, right? And now that you've got all these changes of legislation coming through, especially this year, and much more to come with the Labour government pushing out first day rights and the various other bits and pieces. So there were, from our perspective, we've never used an umbrella company in the whole time we've worked ACS. 15 years of running temps, we've never used umbrella.
Yeah.
But there are many agencies that do use umbrella, and I don't think that a lot of the businesses out there that are utilising agencies on low charge rates, thinking they're getting a deal, necessarily understand the risk element around if that agency goes under and your employees NI and all of the other bits isn't paid, that the supply chain can be sought.
Yeah.
And HMRC can come after that supply chain to get their money.
Yeah.
Are you seeing much of that in your auditing space?
Not so much now. Certainly when I first started auditing, which was 4 or 5 years ago now, 5-6 years ago now. Yes, definitely. There was definitely umbrella agencies operating and limited companies operating perhaps where they shouldn't have been. Because I think umbrella, the model of umbrella, it's a bit like neutral vend. In principle, you think, okay, I understand what you're saying here. You've got one end employer, if you like, and you work across multiple different agencies and businesses and you just get paid by that. In principle, that makes sense. But it's when it's being taken advantage of, which quite often happens. And it's not until, you might be going through a TUPE process and then you realise that, hang on a minute, what's this company on this payslip? That's not. So it's not until you start to do the due diligence, you realise the extent of it. Then it's educating on the risk of it. And then it's a commercial decision as to what they want to do with it thereafter. Because obviously, from an end user, there is a cost advantage at the detriment of the worker quite often.
And just explain it, right? So the worker gets charged to have their payroll processed for them, isn't in essence what that function is. But they're then classed as a self-employed worker, right?
Yes. So the liability then for them is their taxes, their national insurance. Quite often holiday pay will be a factor in that as well. And they're more often than not aware of all these things. And so it's a really tricky situation. But from an auditing perspective, I don't see so many umbrellas now because there's a big spotlight on that.
Yeah, there's a big governance.
The big spotlight on that. But a lot of my auditing, whilst it does sit firmly in ethical from a certain perspective, it's the billing. It's the billing process. So
that's what I was going to ask you. So like you've said, your audits are a bit more effective than the ethical audits with Black Dog Consultancy.
They're,
Right, so-
they're a different type of audit. So from an ethical standpoint, I used to go in and audit and interview the workers, and from a modern slavery and labour exploitation. But I don't necessarily do that so much anymore. I work with the supply chain and look at the entire end-to-end billing. So I will look at the pay slips for the workers. So it's all behind the scenes. It's not necessarily front of house. So I'll look at the pay slips of the workers and make sure that correlates, that pay rate and the agreed charge rate correlates the entire way through the supply chain. And that could be quite straightforward. It could be client, agency, worker. Most simple format. Doesn't take very long. But also you're ensuring that holiday pay is accurate, that the working time directive is not being breached, and all of those things. But then it gets more complicated if you've got the end client, a neutral vendor, agencies, second tiers, then the worker. And it's making sure and ensuring that throughout that entire supply chain that everything is as it should be, from a pay, charge, on cost. And from a neutral vendor perspective, when you're working with agencies, multiple agencies, and then at peak they're working with second tiers, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to audit your entire supply chain to ensure that everything is
where it should be.
Where it should be.
So what can businesses be doing then in terms of, outside from reaching out to you and asking for your support, what initial things can businesses be doing to make sure their supply chain is where it needs to be, especially given that, like we said, the change in legislation and the government able to come up the supply chain now if suppliers fall down or, break the rules?
Mutual liability, due diligence, not saying that businesses would do, but not burying their heads in the sand because of the cheap charge rate, because there'll ultimately be a reason why that charge rate is cheap as it is. And if no other agency can match it, then burying your head in the sand is never going to be a
solution.
Or a defence.
That's more important. It's a defence if you get caught for it, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about my immediate location here, and there is a couple of providers in our area that I can think of right now, and I won't mention them, obviously, that I know that the only way they could possibly be pricing the way they are is if they use an umbrella. So when we're talking about ridiculously low margins, and and it's not even for volume. I've seen higher margins for 300 to 500 temps being asked for at peak than what I'm seeing for an SME using 5 temps. Is some of the pattern we're seeing in the area here, right? So I'm just thinking about what would be your advice in terms of educating that business. Because sometimes I'm going, look, that our umbrella in if they're getting that rate. We can't get anywhere near it. We're telling them the risks, but they're still not necessarily interested in.
Yeah, they.
Because for them, it's like, I'm making the best of it while I can.
Yeah,
attitude.
And the chances are, when you think about these businesses, the book will stop with somebody. Okay, when it comes to that liability, the book will stop with somebody, and it's that business owner ultimately. But is that business owner the one that's making the decision on the agencies that are being used? Probably not. It's going to be the person holding the purse strings that thinks, I've got a budget that I need to work to. I'll bury my head in the sand as to what's going on behind the scenes, but if I can get it at 19, 20 pence margin, I'll go for the 19, 20 pence margin, thank you. So it's making sure the person that's ultimately going to be standing in the courtroom saying, I didn't realise that this was happening, understands the risk to their business and the implications. So at some point, it's going to, I think there's going to be a bit of an explosion of situations where these agencies operating with these umbrella models are going to be outed. There's a reason why the government have done this. It's a bit like the IR35 for the private sector.
Yeah.
They went public sector, and then they targeted the private sector. They'll be gunning for these businesses that they can see are operating with limited companies that shouldn't be operated with limited companies, because they know that there's money to be sought after.
Because it's just a tax avoidance.
Of course it is, yeah.
Right? Which, I do get from some perspectives, if you're an individual wanting to kind of make the most of your income, it's a loophole rather than a law break, right? And I get that. But I think, the bigger picture for me around all of this legislation stuff is that shared liability thing or mutual liability that people are just forgetting about.
Yeah. But it's not until there'll be some case studies, and it won't be until there'll be some situations where it's come, and it'll make headline news, certainly within the industry, and then people will start to wake up and think, hang on a minute, I need to
it'll be another Sports Direct type of scenario, or one of those big things.
And brand, before. And you've got to think about the brand damage. How damaging is it to have because it will never be Joe Blogg's recruitment agency, that's operating outside of their back bedroom. It's always going to be the Sports Direct or the Amazons of the world that will get the publicity.
Will, yeah. They're not interested in the smaller ones. You're right, yeah, because they don't make big enough news. And I was already seeing these name and shame situations where people are businesses, and I saw a small little, appliance, one-man band, appliance repair guy took on a worker. I can't remember what the full story was, but it got named and shamed for paying under national living wage or national minimum wage. I think he'd put them through an apprenticeship. The course didn't start. I can't remember the full detail. But he was listed as a name and shame scenario. And the same thing will happen. And they'll just pick big person brand out, and then that'll be dug deeper.
Yeah. Well, it makes news, doesn't it? It sensationalises it. So
exactly, exactly that. However, going back on the other side of the coin, there are lots of businesses out there that are really compliant, focused on delivery, focused on good service. You're seeing that as well, right? We're not just talking about the bad stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think businesses are becoming a much more savvy nowadays. So they know how a good agency should operate, and they're asking the right questions. And that's the most important thing, isn't it? If you're going to enter into a partnership, a relationship, a supply with an organisation that's supplying labour, human beings, it's really important that you do a bit of homework on that business. It's not like a mug or a pen or a pair of safety boots. You're dealing with humans. It's really important that you need to know how that human was recruited, and that they're being treated in the way that they should be treated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we get audited all the time. We do food manufacturing that has massive governance around it. So we're getting audited by the customers, our customer, their customer. Also in retail, we've got a couple of big businesses where their supply chain is constantly being looked at, and we're quite fortunate that we've always had the business that has focused on compliance and the treatment of staff and all of that stuff. So we don't have to worry about that. But, what is, aside from what you've said already, is there any other bits of advice that you would give to a business thinking about how they could improve their supply chain, or, make sure they're mitigating any risks around modern slavery, auditing, mutual liability? Is it just a case of ask some questions and dig deeper, or?
Due diligence for me. It's just understanding the processes and the systems that those agencies have in place, because quite often that's the biggest downfall, that the processes aren't, the systems aren't robust enough to be able to cope with that agency expanding, and then they buckle under the pressure, and then you're not monitoring the working time. Your process for right to work is not as tight as it perhaps should be. You're recruiting at haste because it's peak, so you pop in an account manager on site that's probably not had the best training when it comes to labour exploitation or modern slavery, and then snowball effect, and then you're firefighting the entire time. So it's being able to spot the signs, isn't it? And talking to your workforce. If you have a large agency temporary workforce on site, talk to them, include them, involve them in your morning huddles or your morning meetings. Get to know them to some extent. It's not a them and us, because a bit like from a supplier perspective, you incorporate your agency workforce, you'll get a lot more from them. They'll be much more loyal. They'll do the extra flex overtime that's needed because they're part of the team. They don't just feel like the agencies that shoved in the corner to pack those boxes.
Exactly that.
And if you do all of those things and you get to know them a little bit more, you will understand if there's any risks in the business when it comes to exploitation or modern slavery.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to the point I made earlier, is that the businesses that do that and are the ones that end up really driving a successful peak.
Totally.
Those that don't and then just want to crack the whip.
You're just battling, aren't you? It's like a magnet that's not quite...
Yeah.
And also, you're making it difficult for everybody because the agency will have a tricky time. Your people, your account consultants, your account managers, it's not easy for them. It's not easy for the team managers, the shift managers, the supervisors. The atmosphere, you can cut it with a knife. You don't need that extra stress when you're going through peak. It's just not healthy for any party. And the temps feel it. So I think it's just important just to work together as much as possible. There's obviously going to be friction. There'll be times when things aren't working quite the way they should do. But let's be grown up and have a conversation around what's working, what's not, and what's within your control to change, what's within their control to change, and then do something about it.
Perfect. Let's talk about leadership training.
Oh, yeah.
Because when we talked about you coming on and joining the podcast, and then I'm guessing as well, this might have been something that you thought about when you first started the business, right? So you've gone from auditing to then leadership training. The two are very different.
But I've always done training, you see. Training's always been my baby. Right. So even though I was auditing, I wasn't doing 5 days a week of auditing.
No.
I couldn't do 5 days a week of auditing. It would be stupid. So I always had a hand in on training, always. Yeah. Even when it kept with Sainsbury's, when the changes around limited IR35 and even AWR. AWR's been in place for donkey's years now, but it's getting them to understand that, if a permanent person is being paid 30 days holiday, a temporary person after a qualifying business. And sometimes businesses aren't aware of that on the ground level.
Yeah.
So the person that's processing isn't aware, I need to tell them about this change or that change. So it's educating the businesses on those changes. So I've always had an arm in on training and supporting from that side of things. But in the last 3 or 4 years, that's where I really want to start to focus, because from a selfish point of view, it's where I get the most satisfaction.
Yeah.
Sitting behind a spreadsheet, calculating billing for 3 days is not where I get my satisfaction. It's seeing these individuals develop month on month on month, going from being relatively unconfident, walking into the training environment thinking, geez, what do I expect? To having that trusted environment where we're open, it's collaborative, it's accountable, it's got purpose. You see them flourish month on month on month. And I love that.
So give us just a kind of overview of when you talk about training, because it's such a vast thing, right? And I know you've incorporated DISC into that as well. So just explain what DISC is, and then how you're utilising that to help businesses train. And are you talking from ground up training, or is it just leadership training, or is it where
it's all layers.
Okay.
So DISC is a personality profiling tool, and there's 4 main personality profiles, if you like. If you want to be sort of really sort of back to the bones of it.
Because it's probably been, I don't know, I reckon it's 10 years ago that I did DISC.
DISC has been around for donkey's years, like many other assessments.
There was one big company, wasn't there? Was it like Thomas something?
Yeah.
Used to do.
Well, Wiley is the organisation with DISC.
Right.
And so you've got 4 main profiles. So you've got dominance, D. D is dominant, direct, assertive, task processed, focused individuals. You've got the I's, they're influencers, they're influential, they're energetic, they're enthusiastic, they're people focused, but high energy and fast.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got S, which is steady, supportive, people orientated, slower. They kind of don't operate at such a fast level as the D's and the I's.
Yeah.
And then you've got the C's. They're the conscientious. They're the considerers. They're the ones that quite often are your finance directors, are your auditors. They tick.
So C's not for compliance, and
no, C's is for considerers.
Considerers.
They're considerers, yeah.
Right, okay.
So they're the ones in the training environment that you can see mulling over everything you're saying. If you come up with if you have a stat or a fact, they'll be the one going, I might fact check that afterwards because I'm not sure that's, they're your spreadsheet. They love a good spreadsheet.
Okay.
It's a bit of an in-joke with the C's. And the D's are, the more dominant, direct individuals. So DISC plays a really big part. It's peppered throughout my training. It's not I don't do DISC training per se, although I do that at the very beginning so people really understand it. So everybody that I train is DISC profiled, and then we use a platform called Catalyst. And Catalyst is a game changer when it comes to DISC because you collaborate with other people on Catalyst. So, for example, if I'm training a leader who's got a new direct report, we will look and compare that person with that new direct report on Catalyst to see what their similarities are, what their points of difference are, where they'll collaborate well together, where you need to get their buy-in. And you then start to talk the same language. You then realise that when you're bringing that person in for a review meeting or for a collaboration where you need to get them to buy into a process system change or whatever, you'll look on Catalyst and say, right, they're reserved, they're sceptical. I need to use that language. They're not people orientated. So asking them how they feel probably won't land well with them. So it's talking the language of them rather than, in the same way, it's managing how they want to be managed rather than naturally how you would go about managing.
Right, okay. So let's just talk about it in the simplest of terms again, for people that don't know what this is, right? So if I want to go and do a personality profile using DISC, I'd engage with you or another person that uses this as a consultancy, right? And then it's what's the process of identifying whether I'm a dominant or a caring?
So you will go through a number of questions online, answer a number of questions online, and it will be situational questions quite often. And if you answer inconsistently, it will keep asking you those questions in a different way to get to a definite result. Okay. And then, so once you've answered all those questions, you'll get a profile and it will say, Chris, you are a DI. And as a DI, you like this, you do that, you operate this way, you like to collaborate, you like to be assertive, blah. It's like a 5-6 page report, if not longer. But that's a static report. And that's quite often what's happened with these profiles in the past, is that you look at it, you're super interested, it's all about you, and then you put it in the drawer and you forget about it. Catalyst is different. So once you've done that report, you automatically get access to Catalyst, which is the platform. And then it tells you, you've got videos and snippets and how you can collaborate, how you can get buy-in and how you can...
So it uses some coaching mechanism.
How you manage change, how you motivate. individuals based on their disc styles.
Okay.
And so Catalyst is really for groups. It's not really, it's fine as you, if you wanted to do it and just look at yourself. But the benefit of it is if you had your management team and they were all on Catalyst and they all had access to each other, so it's open. And then when you're having a managers meeting and you know that you might be high on the eyes, you'll have people going in there super excited, enthusiastic, bouncing bunnies with 101 ideas, but no execution. So you need to make sure that you bring a D in that's going to drive the agenda, that's going to be decisive. But you also need a C that thinks about the what if, because you've got two high energies, D and an I, that are just blazing forward, fast paced, not
But
considering,
no one
considering what's the plan B if that fails? What's the plan B if that doesn't work well? So it's looking at bringing the right people in. And when it comes to sales, that's the absolute gold, because you've got to think about having the right people in the room that's going to read the room, that's going to be able to build the rapport. So the I, if you go on a first sales meeting, an I and a D would be great, because the I would build the rapport really quickly, the D would close the sale.
Gotcha. So if we were looking at it as if I was building a team now from scratch, I would want to make sure I have each of those strong personality sets to make a fully rounded team. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, so definitely to a certain extent. What you tend to find within recruitment is that it's pretty heavily populated with D's and I's. And
because we're naturally salesy,
and fast-paced. You've got to be reactive quickly. So you will find, if you did a group report on your business, you'd probably find you've got more D's and I's. Where the S's and the C's play really well is account management. So if they were based on site, you don't necessarily need a D and an I on site. What you need is someone who's super supportive with the workforce, but really compliant and conscientious and considered when it comes to the fact that they're based on their client's site. So that's where the differentiators come in. And quite often when people are recruiting, you just recruit like for like. We've lost an account manager, we need to recruit an account manager. We've lost a branch manager, we need to recruit a branch manager. But they're not considering, what does that now look like? What does my business model look like? What does my what are my objectives for the future look like? What are my goals? What's the business strategy? What's the cultural fit? And this is when DISC plays a really big part, because then you can start to consider all those things that are above and beyond a CV.
Okay. So because I remember, and I'm not gonna mention the business name. But I remember, I would say it was 2007. I left Right for Staff.
Yeah.
I joined another business as a new startup branch manager. 12 weeks in, they just rocked up one day and said, "We're shutting it." And I was already doing decent GP on temps, but they just said, we decided just to shut it. We don't want to carry on. You need to.
I think we met back up again in the
that was probably around that time where I started speaking to you again, right? And I went for an interview of a business, and the first thing he did with me, and it was a local recruiter that still exists, was a DISC profile, and that was probably the last time I did one actually. So it's 20 years ago, so it's longer than I thought it was. And back then it was a multiple choice tick box sheet that they must have put through a scanner or something, and then it told them
churned out the
results. And without interviewing me, said, "I'm sorry, but we're not going to continue. You don't meet the profile."
I had exactly the same situation with Adecco, actually. So I went for an interview with Adecco. They put me into a dark little hubby, like back room that had a load of keyboards at the time. We had to do type testing, and they asked me to do a personality profiling, which I did. She then churned out the results and said, "It says that you're not very good with change. Therefore, we're not going to pursue this application." And I was like, "But you've not even met me properly to know whether I'm any good with change or adaptable."
And the same thing happened with me. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that obviously it's evolved since then. I get that 20 years on. But when we think about how businesses recruit now, it's very much led by, we've gone a full reversal now. We're back into the hirer has got choice because levels of unemployment is high. I think the last stats was it's now 5.5 applicants per job. If a business wants to look at DISC and make sure that they're not missing out on quality people, but they want to use the principles of it to establish a team and make sure they understand their gaps and stuff, how can they avoid that circumstance like that? Because that was a recruitment business. Yeah. That then, thinking now 15, 20 years on, I'm running my own recruitment business. So they lucked out there because, they missed out there because I might have been really successful for them.
Yeah, same with me with Echo. I think one thing is really important with DISC is not to pigeonhole. And I'm very conscious of that when I'm delivering my training. So I will know the DISC profiles, generally speaking, for everyone that I'm working with. And typically my training is anywhere between 8 delegates to 12 delegates at a time. But I'll know their profiles. But just because I know their profiles doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be saying, oh, you're such a high C because you've said that. I might think it maybe, but I wouldn't say it because, there's nuances. There's always nuances. So I think the most important thing in terms of advice is absolutely read and consider the DISC profile because more often than not, it's going to be accurate. I've not seen one yet, even when I've had people's disputes say, I'm not like that. And then we've talked about it and actually, I see what you mean now. I understand that. So definitely consider the DISC profile. Talk to the individual around the DISC profile and ask them questions on why they feel that might be the case or might not be the case. But also it's looking at attributes and they do feature in the DISC profile, resilience, accountability. All of those things are so important now, more so than ever when businesses are running pretty lean and you don't have you can't afford to have a that's not my job attitude anymore, can you? Everyone has to muck in and be prepared to do perhaps more than what's on their job spec.
100%. So businesses need to operate like that now because the costs are so high and all of that stuff, right?
And you need individuals that recognise that. So, and DISC can play a really good part in uncovering whether you've got someone that's got that, who's able to flex a bit, to be able to be a bit more manoeuvrable when it comes to change and adapting and looking at things slightly outside of their box or scope.
Okay. So for a business then wanting to explore this a little bit further, what would be your kind of starting advice for them?
To explore DISC or training?
DISC and but we'll come on to training, but more about the DISC profiling and then, what strategy do you help them adopt and is it expensive?
No, I don't think it's expensive. It's dependent on the amount of profiles you have. You're talking around £110 per profile, starting point. Obviously less if you go for more. But you've also got Agile EQ, which is emotional intelligence. And you've got management, which is all around leadership, your leadership and management style. So there's lots of different profiles you can look at dependent on the people within your business. The first thing I would say is have a look online. It's Wiley, everything DISC. Reach out to me. I'll happily have a conversation at no charge to discuss whether or not it would be the right fit for their business or not.
Because there's lots of these profiling.
There is. There are
mechanisms, isn't there, that businesses can explore, not just DISC. There's others that are available out there as well.
Yeah.
I know DISC is probably the most common and long-standing one. Is that what am I right in saying that?
Yeah, Wiley has been around for many, many years. It's an American company, and it's one of, if not the most credible. I know I'm a practitioner, so I'm biased, but the Catalyst system for me is the game changer because so many other assessments, it's a paper PDF, so it doesn't come to life. The beauty of using DISC is that you integrate it within your business. It's not just a one-off assessment. It's part of your business practice. And so that's why having unlimited use of Catalyst, free of charge, once you've done the disc profile, you've got it for life, you can tap into all those nuggets and gems when it comes to buying and collaboration to be able to speed up. I mean, it's proven with using disc within your business to increase productivity by 30% because
I was going to ask you that because you've put somewhere my research. I'm going to say my researcher, but it's actually Claude. You guarantee a 30% productivity boost on all your money back. That's bold. How do you actually measure that? And have you ever had to have a refund?
No, never needed to refund. So for me, it all starts with, again, doing my due diligence. At the very beginning. If I'm working with any business, I need to understand your business strategies. What's your goal? What's your focus? What do you want from me? How do I measure that success? So is it retention? Is it increased revenue? Is it a focus on sales? So we look at all of those things. I then adapt my training programs to work on your strategies and goals. Then what I do is a deep dive into each individual that's coming onto that training program, each delegate, because my programs run anything from minimum of 3 to 10 or 11. So it's in the whole year. So I do deep dive into those individuals. What's their needs? What are their strengths? What would you like to see at the end of this program with that individual? My goal is then to get them there. So, for example, I'll look at the strategic objectives of that business, and then I absolutely am like a dog with a bone, fixated on those objectives to ensure by the end of that program they're delivered.
So how long does a program typically last?
Normally 12 months because we'll have a break November and December for peak. Okay. So it's a 10-month program, 10 session program with a break at Christmas. And it runs every 4 to 5 weeks because what happens is it's all accountability led. So every single session I hold is all looking at, okay, what are your commitments from this program? And then it's layered. So I generally start off with communication because it's such a big topic. And then communication is layered into every single session thereafter. So communication, delegation and accountability. And then communication when it comes to effective customer service, communication when it comes to sales and active listening, then the emotional intelligence. So communication is layered into all of my sessions, but they're designed so that after each session, they go back and they implement it from day one. It's not just, again, that their notes are sat in their drawer until 4 weeks later when they dust them off and come back to my next one.
Which quite often is like, oh shit, it's the day before the next training session. I better just do what I was supposed to have done. And
no.
They rush it.
And also it's not heavily weighted on workload. So I don't ask them for war and peace essay of what they're planning on doing for the next. It's just key takeaways and commitments. And then we review them the following month, what's worked well, how are they still developing with it, what extra support do they need, and then I'll look at doing coaching and mentoring in between.
On a one-to-one?
On a one-to-one, yeah.
Right, okay.
So it's pretty intense. And for me, it has to have a return on investment because going right back to the beginning of our conversation about, I can't sit back, I don't have a wage slip every month appearing
of course.
in my inbox. I'm only as good as my last training session. Like anyone in sales is only as good as their last sale. So if that doesn't land well, I'm under a lot of pressure to make sure that it lands. They're paying, good money for this.
Well, you're going to be talking a few quid there, aren't you? If you've got, a team of 10, let's say, that's already 1,100 quid for the disc, and then your time, then the sessions times, it's a few quid, but worth it if you're going to get 30%.
Well, for me,
you'd probably take 20%, wouldn't you?
The testament is that every single customer that I work with, and I say customer now, and client, I have repeat business. I've worked with them for years and years. And it's still there's no end in sight now, because I've become so super sticky within their business, because I understand them and I understand their people, and I understand how to drive improvements and to go beyond the training room.
So are you only focusing on recruitment? Or have
At
you got
the moment
stuff
I
outside of
am,
it?
but all of my training is adaptable. So I use case studies and scenarios of the recruitment based, but it can be adapted to any leadership environment. Leadership is leadership, isn't it? And emerging talent is emerging talent. The next generation of managers and leaders. So every one of my training sessions can be adapted to any industry. But at the moment, I'm focused on recruitment because there's so much there to still be had. And that's my network. My network's largely recruitment.
Okay. So circling back then to a bit earlier when we were talking about taking that leap, if you were to have a coffee with yourself again now, when you were contemplating leaving that corporate world and diving into consultancy, what advice would you be giving yourself?
I would say, just do it. Don't even look in that rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Okay.
Because that, and don't sweat the small stuff. It's when you work for yourself, and you've worked in a corporate environment where you've got someone who's amazing at doing Excel spreadsheets that you can, delegate to them, and you've got somebody that, you can delegate to a proposal document to. When you work, you have to wear so many caps. Your marketing, your credit control,
sure.
Your delivery, your creator.
That's the bit that people don't see, right? When they think, you run your own business, they don't see the duck feet. They just see the gliding across the water.
Yeah, and the amount of work that goes in, yes, you get paid for the day you're delivering. And yes, you probably get paid for doing a bit of content creation, but you don't. I spend so many days. It's got to be right. It's got to land well. And I don't care whether that takes me half a day or 3 days. If I am not 100% confident and comfortable with the delivery of that training, it won't happen until I am. I had somebody just literally about 6-7 weeks ago say, "Do you ever wing your training? Do you ever wing it?" And I thought, really? Do I ever wing my training? If you knew what went on behind the scenes.
I get the question though, because I've stood in front of, I've tried a couple of ways, because we do some internal training. And one of the things that I was always really impressed with when I worked in corporate, back then I didn't really consider Right for Staff particularly corporate, although when you think about it now, it obviously is, because GI is probably corporate. But Right for Staff had a really family feel to it, I felt, bearing in mind it was 20 years ago. And I was always really impressed with the investment in training back then. So we do some internal training here from different things, periods of time. And if I'm delivering it, and it might be sales led, there'll be times where I really think about what I want to get over, but then there are times that I will wing it, because it comes across as a little bit more, for me, natural in what they're struggling with right now.
And I think that's where he was coming from, because I obviously have a structure to my training, but depending on what's happening in that room at that time, we will park it and we'll have a discussion and we'll talk about situations and maybe how they can overcome it. And then it becomes a bit of a coaching session. And then we'll come back to the training, because for me, the most important thing is them.
So it's like a framework.
It's a framework,
I've got a list of questions here, but I'm not asking them all. This is just because it's bearing on what you're telling me and how the conversation is flowing. And I think where the difference for me when I receive training, when I think about when I was a consultant or whatever, if it is very, very scripted and very structured, it don't go in.
Yeah.
If it's relatable to real life experience and what's going on right now,
100%.
I'm more tuned in.
And that's exactly why I called the business Ditch the Script, because I
Yeah.
don't want to ever receive feedback to say, yeah, it was good, bit structured, bit scripted, didn't really land, wasn't tailored to us and our situation, which is why I need to understand them before they even hit that room.
Yeah.
You know, I speak to their manager and understand them as individuals, and then I'll carve my training around that.
So Ditch the Script, I'm glad you said that. So is that your training arm of the Black Dog consultancy, or the Black Dog for auditing and...
Black Dogs, I've got 2 businesses at the moment. I'm looking to consolidate next financial year. But Black Dogs is primarily for consultancy work, so auditing and supply chain consultancy. And then Ditch the Script is wholly training. Yeah.
So what, you're going to rebrand it?
I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do. No, I won't rebrand it. We'll stay with it. I think I'll stick with Ditch the Script. Yeah. Because that's a stronger brand when it comes to training. Yeah.
I like that as, you know, the Ditch the Script thing. I think it's good. And I think that it makes... I think, like we just said, that, you know, no one can doubt how much effort you put into the framework around the training, but the ability to just ad-lib it at times is what people are going to get value from, perhaps, or whatever. Then it's important for that to remain.
Yeah.
So it's good. So finishing off then, in terms of where do you see the evolution of the space? Do you think there's going to be even more emphasis on training and the need for it, or is it going to go lesser and lesser, and people are going to rely more on Claude and ChatGPT? And
well, I think there's a danger there, because touching on exactly what you've just said a few minutes ago, it's not just the content, it's the delivery. It's bringing it to life, and that was evident 12 months ago when we started with a particular customer, and for the first 2 sessions, they just didn't land well at all, because it was all the delivery and the content was great, but the delivery just didn't land well. And so we then had to look at ourselves and say, right, what's working, what's not? What do we need to do to adapt this? Yeah, I think it is all about the execution as well as the content. It's really important that you can bring it to life. It's really important that you can bring those real life experiences and still be relevant and relatable, because so often in training, they haven't been operational since the late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah. So if you haven't still got an arm in operationally, then you lose relevance so quickly. The market's changing so quickly, isn't it?
It is massively, yeah. 100%. Okay, so I'm just thinking about SMEs then that want to look at how they can develop their teams. What would be your, we've talked about DISC, but in terms of development of their teams, if they've got a group of people, everyone's rubbing along, it's all going all right, but they know that they can maybe getting that 30% extra out of them just for a bit of development, and they don't necessarily know which way to go with it. What would be your piece of advice about finding out about training and speaking to people like yourself?
Well, first thing I would suggest is have a look at which training provider you want to work with. I would happily have a conversation. And between us, we would scope it out. So it would be, I would really scratch under the surface of that business to understand what are the most important things. What do you want to see at the end of this? And then we scope out a training program around those most important things. So it's having a conversation with the training provider that isn't just an off-the-shelf provider of modules, to understand then. Because quite often business owners, when you're in business, you're so busy in the thick of the business that you don't necessarily see the wood for the trees. And it's not until somebody comes in from a consultancy level to be able to look and say, is that fit for purpose right now? Is that fit for purpose for your future plans? If not, let's look at what needs to change, what needs to adapt, what needs to enhance.
But how long does that exercise take for a business owner looking to speak to someone like yourself, and for you to get to understand that business, to deliver training with their objectives?
Depends
in
how
mind?
intense it is. It's usually 2-3 meetings.
Okay.
So it would generally be an online initially,
Mhm.
just to see if we're the right match. You know, am I culturally right for you? Are they culturally right for me?
Mhm.
And then we'd have a face-to-face where we'd scope out the individuals that they're intending to bring onto the course. We have a look and a bit of a deep dive into those. And then we look at what would work and in what order.
Okay, cool. So last question then. If people want to find you, obviously we're going to tag you in any video and LinkedIn posts, etc. But if they want to reach out to you directly, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, I have a website called Ditch the Script. So
Okay.
www.ditchthescript.co.uk. And all of our contact details are on there, including my email address. There's also a really nice toolkit that can be downloadable. So it's a leadership toolkit covering 5 different sort of modules, if you like, of how to support your teams better when it comes to sales, motivation, accountability, delegation. So feel free to download that, and it gives you a snapshot of some of the training that's delivered. And then if you want to know more, then happily arrange a call.
Great.
Meeting.
Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on to
Thank
Talent
you for
Unboxed.
inviting me.
And it's been really great having a chat with you. And yeah, we look forward to sharing this with the wider audience and seeing where we go from there.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
No, thank you.